Prince William did not wait. The moment he confirmed Queen Camilla had quietly ordered the removal of Princess Charlotte's portrait from Clarence House, the future king moved with speed and resolve. What began as a subtle shift in palace decor ignited a behind-the-scenes confrontation, one that exposed long-held tensions inside the royal household and placed two powerful figures on a collision course over the future of the monarchy. Multiple palace insiders, speaking under condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of the issue, confirmed that the incident began with what appeared to be a routine curatorial adjustment. A staff member assigned to Clarence House's East Gallery noticed something unusual during the morning rounds. A silver-framed portrait of Princess Charlotte, taken by the Princess of Wales for her 9th birthday, had been removed. The photo had long held a place alongside images of her brothers, George and Louis, representing the unity and continuity of the House of Windsor. But now, the image was gone. The frame, usually immaculately dusted and proudly displayed, had vanished without explanation. According to one staffer, the effect was immediate and unsettling. It wasn't a rotation, they noted. George and Louis's portraits remained. It was just Charlotte's. Ugh. Palace staff trained in discretion began whispering about the change, speaking in coded phrases and avoiding direct blame. Yet within hours, the story had made its way to Kensington Palace, not via formal channels, but through the internal network of long-serving employees who had weathered royal storms for decades. It was in a quiet phone call between two administrative aides, one still stationed at Clarence House and another now working under the Prince and Princess of Wales, that the full weight of the action was first made clear. "She was the only one removed," whispered Eleanor, a veteran servant with over 20 years of experience inside royal households. "I saw it. I watched them wrap the frame in felt. They didn't move George's or Louis's, just hers. As if she didn't belong." The response at Kensington was swift but measured. Aides informed Catherine, Princess of Wales, who reportedly received the news with quiet disbelief. Known for her calm under pressure, she listened without interruption, her reaction limited to a tightening of the jaw and a deep breath. But it was Prince William, arriving later that evening, who immediately recognized the deeper implication. Those close to the prince say he read the report twice, then placed it on the desk without a word. He moved Charlotte's photograph from the mantel to the center of the room, an act that, though small, sent a message as clear as any press release. "This is not about a photo," one source explained. "It's about who gets to define the royal story." For Prince William, the moment echoed a painful chapter from his youth. He had watched as his mother, Princess Diana, was slowly erased from public spaces and royal narratives in the years following her separation from the monarchy. It was a silent rewriting of history, one that had left a deep scar. Now, as a father, he saw the same erasure threatening his daughter. The following morning, William requested a full audit of curatorial changes made at Clarence House over the past month. He wanted names, timestamps, and documentation. The directive was professional, not emotional. As one aide described, he was acting not just as a father, but as a future sovereign. Behind closed doors, the prince met with his private secretary to prepare for a direct conversation with Queen Camilla. No press leaks, no indirect retaliation, just a single scheduled visit. Less than 48 hours after the photo's removal, Prince William arrived unannounced at Clarence House. He entered through the private courtyard, without advisors or security, and walked the familiar halls with determination. Staff watched in silence. They knew something had shifted. In the white drawing room, Queen Camilla was reviewing charity reports when the footman announced, "His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, ma'am." She looked up, startled. "William," she said, her tone laced with forced warmth. "What a surprise!" There was no smile in return. Still standing in his coat, William met her eyes with a quiet firmness. Why was Charlotte's picture taken down? Camilla paused, lips parting slightly, then attempted a light tone. "Oh, it was just a small visual refresh. A curatorial decision. You know how these things go. But William didn't blink. George's stayed, Louis's stayed, only Charlotte's was removed. I'll ask again, why? The question hung in the room like a final chord. Camilla, known for her control and poise, appeared momentarily disarmed. She placed her papers on the desk, steadying herself. It wasn't personal, she replied carefully. The room needed balance. We were adjusting the atmosphere. But William remained still. Voice quiet, but unmistakably resolute. This isn't about atmosphere. This is about legacy. You can't quietly decide who gets to be part of this family's future. His words marked a new tone, one not just of frustration, but of authority. Staff members later recounted that Queen Camilla said nothing as William exited, but his final words were delivered with calm precision. Put the image back, or I will, and this time I won't be quiet. What followed was a near immediate response from palace management. Within 48 hours, a royal conservator arrived at Clarence House, accompanied by two of the Queen's senior advisors. A new portrait was installed not where the original had hung, but in an even more prominent location, at the base of the grand staircase. A new frame, a new plaque, and a new message. It read, Princess Charlotte of Wales, the future of the monarchy. The portrait's return was not a restoration. It was a statement. And within palace walls, statements are rarely just about décor. The new positioning of Princess Charlotte's image framed in gold, placed at a high-traffic junction between the grand staircase and the East Gallery, spoke volumes. It told every guest, every dignitary, every aide walking those steps exactly where the future stood. While there was no press release, no public comment, the shift in tone was immediate. Among staff, the message was unambiguous. Prince William had drawn a line, and it had been respected. Behind the quiet reinstallation was a flurry of administrative recalibration. Clarence House aides coordinated with the Royal Collection Trust. Internal memos referenced an update in gallery protocol. But insiders knew the language was protective, designed to cover what was, at its core, a forced reversal of a Queen's unspoken directive. It wasn't just about a picture, said one palace employee with over a decade of service. It was about who has the authority to shape the monarchy's narrative. That battle has been quietly brewing for years. Queen Camilla, long experienced in navigating public sentiment, remained outwardly composed. But reports from Clarence House indicated that she paused unusually long when she next passed the staircase. A source described her gaze as fixed and unreadable. She said nothing, simply continued walking. But silence has weight. Within Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was one of muted vindication. Princess Catherine reportedly informed Charlotte gently that her portrait had been returned to grandfather's home. It looks even better now, she smiled, downplaying the intensity of what had transpired. Charlotte, still a child, asked plainly, "Why did they take it down?" Catherine responded with careful calm. "Maybe someone forgot how important you are, but Daddy reminded them." That reminder carried deeper resonance. For Prince William, this was not a one-time conflict. It was part of a broader, ongoing struggle for narrative control within the modern monarchy. Since Queen Elizabeth II's passing, questions of influence and visual legacy had grown more urgent. With King Charles focused on ceremonial duties and legacy consolidation, and Queen Camilla increasingly active in shaping public-facing palace decor, William had chosen his moment to assert a generational boundary. It wasn't defiance, noted one former royal advisor. It was an assertion. The future king made it clear that his children and, by extension, the memory of their grandmother will not be curated out of the royal frame. The tension, though not formally acknowledged, was palpable. William did not escalate further, but his private office began auditing other royal properties. Portrait placements, gallery adjustments, and guest room curation across Windsor and Sandringham were reviewed. Quietly, strategically, images of the Wales family appeared more prominently at key entrances and transitional corridors. Meanwhile, Camilla returned to her duties with a sharpened focus on charity work and regional visits. But aides close to her noted a subtle shift, an increase in guardedness around visual decisions. "She still curates," one said, "but now she double-checks who might see it." Internally, King Charles was briefed. Though he did not formally intervene, senior aides confirmed he was aware of the incident and the fallout. "His Majesty respects his son's protective instincts," said one source. "He also understands the stakes. Stakes, indeed, that went beyond interior design. Because the palace is not just a residence, it is a symbol. Every corridor, every frame, every photo quietly builds a story for the public, the press, and the world. In that story, the presence or absence of a child's smile can signal an entire generational philosophy." Charlotte's restored portrait now stood not only as a family image, but as a subtle reaffirmation of lineage. For the monarchy, where stability and succession are paramount, such affirmations matter deeply. It was William's way of ensuring that no matter who occupied which role today, the public would never forget who was next. That moment redefined the internal hierarchy, not of titles, but of tone. A staff member summarized it best. "It used to be that Camilla set the tone for the household. After this, it's clear William is setting the tone for the future." And that future had just spoken quietly, but with a golden frame and a brass plate no one could ignore. Inside the monarchy, decisions made in silence often speak louder than proclamations. And in the days following the return of Princess Charlotte's portrait to Clarence House, silence surrounded Queen Camilla. Those within her immediate circle noted a shift in posture. She became more reserved, more selective about who entered discussions regarding gallery arrangements or interior alterations. One senior attendant remarked, "She didn't stop curating, but she stopped assuming it would go unnoticed." Camilla's private office halted all planned decorative changes at the East Gallery. Scheduled rotations of portraiture were postponed indefinitely, pending internal harmonization. To those who understood palace code, that phrase translated to one thing. William's influence had drawn new lines, and no one wanted to overstep. But the incident did more than temporarily freeze royal aesthetics. It stirred memories. It brought to the surface unspoken dynamics that had simmered beneath years of public cordiality. Within Adelaide Cottage, home to the Prince and Princess of Wales, the air was different too. William, having made his point, showed no desire to escalate, but his staff adopted a firmer tone in inter-household coordination. Communications with Clarence House shifted in tone more formal, more procedural. There was a tightening of protocol that indicated not hostility, but boundaries. For Catherine, those boundaries were both a relief and a quiet burden. She had long been a stabilizing force in the family, navigating roles as mother, diplomat, and future queen consort. The episode had reminded her, and the country, of the weight her family now carried. "She didn't gloat," said one aide, "but she stood taller that week." Meanwhile, within royal media circles, something peculiar happened. Without official instruction or campaign, photos of Princess Charlotte began appearing more frequently in public engagements. Kensington Palace released a series of new portraits, some formal, some candid. They were shared across official platforms, accompanied by gentle, thoughtful captions about family, growth, and future responsibilities. It was not a publicity blitz, it was a quiet reaffirmation. And the public noticed. Comments across social platforms trended positive, with users highlighting Charlotte's charm, confidence, and resemblance to both Diana and Catherine. Royal correspondents remarked on the sudden soft spotlight, a term used to describe subtle elevation of a family member within the public narrative, without formal promotion. The British press, too, picked up the shift. Without referencing the Clarence House episode directly, there was no official confirmation they began publishing comparative pieces on royal children, legacy, and continuity. Several noted that Charlotte, often viewed as the poised middle child, now occupied a growing symbolic role within the royal storyline. Back inside Clarence House, Camilla's senior advisors were under pressure to manage perception. Aides emphasized continuity, downplayed any rift, and redirected attention to the Queen's charitable work. But internally, they knew a recalibration had occurred. This wasn't just about losing a decision, said a former palace strategist. It was about being reminded who's next in line and what that means in practice. Even King Charles, traditionally insulated from operational frictions, made subtle acknowledgements. During a private visit to Kensington, he reportedly commented positively on a newly placed group photo of his grandchildren featuring Charlotte in the centre. The message, again, required no words. Within royal tradition, few acts are more potent than the redistribution of visibility. The placement of a portrait, the focus of a photo, even the position of a name in a program all shape perception. And perception, in a constitutional monarchy, often is power. What had begun as a simple act of removal had evolved into something larger, a cultural correction within the institution. William had not sought revenge. He had not leveraged press or positioned himself as a public defender. Instead, he had exercised the authority of a future king in the most royal of ways, through decorum, through detail, and through symbolic insistence. For those who paid attention to the cues, the outcome was clear. The Wales family was not just next in line, they were already shaping the monarchy's new vocabulary. And Princess Charlotte, whose smile had briefly vanished from a palace wall, now beamed from staircases, corridors, and newsstands alike. Her image, once removed, now stood restored, not by order, but by consequence. The gallery had changed, the balance had shifted, and behind those gilded frames, a new narrative had quietly taken hold. Even in the absence of formal declarations, royal power has always depended on symbols, and in the weeks following the portrait incident, the symbolism intensified. The reassertion of Princess Charlotte's image had disrupted more than just wall space. It had activated an unspoken undercurrent within the institution, a recalibration of succession, influence, of legacy visibility, and of emotional alliances inside the firm. For senior aides across Buckingham Palace, Sandringham, and Windsor, the event triggered meetings not public, not documented, but real. Meetings where royal communications officers quietly compared visibility metrics, where scheduling advisors reviewed upcoming appearances for the Wales children, and where archivists and curators re-evaluated the visual balance in key royal estates. The immediate result was a visual softening of the power imbalance. Within royal residences, spaces began to reflect the generational shift that was already underway. Group portraits previously centered around Charles and Camilla were adjusted. New photographs of the Wales family appeared in greeting areas for visiting dignitaries. In one room at Windsor Castle, an aide noticed that an older portrait of Diana, previously kept in a private hallway, had been returned to a semi-public gallery space near the Queen's reading room. This wasn't revolution, it was restoration. William never commented. He didn't need to. His silence, disciplined and deliberate, had become its own brand of authority. One courtier noted, "He's inherited the Queen's control, but Diana's fire, that's a rare combination." Behind the scenes, Camilla adjusted her public rhythm. Appearances continued, but there were subtle absences. Her engagements were now more locally focused. Invitations once extended jointly between the King and Queen were now filtered more selectively. Public optics had shifted, and though few inside the palace would admit it, the Queen consort's internal power had diminished, if only slightly. A source close to the palace observed, "She still commands respect, but the space she holds has narrowed." Meanwhile, Charlotte herself remained blissfully unaware of the storm surrounding her, but those closest to her saw the afterglow of a battle fought on her behalf. Catherine took extra care during photo sessions, reviewing every frame before release. William, though busier than ever, carved out more family time. Their public outings, though rare, were calibrated to remind the public, this family is not just royal, they are unified. The impact also rippled into Parliament-adjacent circles. While not addressed directly, The shift in visibility for the Wales family prompted several senior MPs, with ties to the Privy Council, to request briefings on succession optics. One Conservative backbencher noted, "What the public sees influences what they expect. If the Wales children are consistently visible and dignified, it reinforces the perception that the future is in steady hands. The Crown, after all, relies as much on perception as it does on protocol, and perception was tilting." At a state reception in Scotland, the King hosted a delegation from Canada. On display in the ornate banquet room was a new triptych portrait series. George, Charlotte, and Louis, painted separately, but displayed together. It was the first time Charlotte's portrait had been commissioned at this scale. Observers noted the placement. Charlotte's image, centre-mounted, featured her standing in profile, wearing a pale blue sash with subtle embroidery of the royal arms. Her expression was calm, her posture upright, her hands delicately clasped. The symbolism was unmistakable. Royal art historians began commenting publicly, noting how the portrait's composition echoed similar works of past female heirs, Princess Margaret, Princess Elizabeth, and even Queen Victoria in youth. Online discourse erupted, speculating whether the monarchy was preparing to elevate Charlotte's visibility not just as a royal child, but as a symbolic stabilizer for the next era. Inside Clarence House, the silence continued. Camilla refrained from attending the Scottish reception. While the Queen's absence was officially attributed to prior commitments, insiders confirmed the decision was mutual and strategic. The palace had no desire to draw renewed attention to the portrait's original controversy. But the truth remained. One quiet choice, made in a private room over tea, had turned into a test of boundaries. William had passed it, and in doing so, he had repositioned not only his daughter, but the entire generational narrative of the monarchy. It was a reminder that kingship is not declared only in coronations, it is asserted in choices, in confrontations handled without spectacle, and in legacies quietly preserved. The institution had been reminded who its future belonged to. And perhaps, so had the Queen. Weeks turned into months. The waves created by a single removed portrait had long subsided from headlines, but their ripple effect was far from over. Inside the royal institution, changes that began as reaction evolved into quiet recalibrations, each one redefining the landscape of royal influence. At the heart of this subtle transformation was Prince William, whose direct yet restrained handling of the Clarence House incident had not only restored a single image, but fortified his position as a future monarch who would lead without spectacle but with spine. Privately, staff referred to it as the gold frame moment. The phrase became shorthand for instances where decorum had to meet resolve, where silence wasn't surrender, but strategy. And within the circle of aides closest to William and Catherine, it became a template, how power should be used, when lines should be drawn, and most importantly, how family would be protected. While the Wales household remained quiet on the issue, their growing influence could be felt in ways even more significant than gallery placements or photo releases. Policy shaping, event planning, and future-facing initiatives increasingly ran through William's inner circle. His team began piloting community-focused programs that emphasized mental health, youth leadership, and royal accessibility. These weren't just charitable efforts, they were strategic positionings. And within those moves, Princess Charlotte played a subtle but pivotal role. Public interest in Charlotte surged. Her appearances, though still infrequent, were watched with increased attention. Commentators observed her quiet poise, her calm demeanor, and her uncanny ability to carry a composed presence in crowds. In one memorable moment during a school charity event, Charlotte was seen helping a nervous classmate adjust their presentation papers before stepping on stage. The video, shared online by a local teacher, went viral. "She didn't do it because a camera was on," the teacher wrote. "She did it because it was kind." That single clip, innocent, unscripted, and deeply human, was picked up by broadcasters across the UK. Within 48 hours, it was dubbed the Princess Pause, a phrase quickly turned into a symbol of grace under pressure. The coverage was not orchestrated, yet it captured exactly what the institution had needed to remind the public of continuity rooted in character. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's visibility had narrowed further. Though she remained active in ceremonial roles, her engagements were increasingly focused on niche patronages. Her public image was carefully managed, often flanked by neutral events and moderated press access. Royal watchers noticed a distinct shift in editorial tone, less emphasis on her personal influence, more on her supporting role beside the king. Insiders noted that Camilla's core strategy had changed. Rather than challenge, she sought stability. While never acknowledging the incident publicly, she reportedly told a confidant, "Sometimes, the wind changes. You can push against it, or you can close the window." The monarchy, by its very design, is an institution built on both endurance and adaptation. And what unfolded over that season became a masterclass in how legacy is no longer just inherited, it is defended. It wasn't the removal of a portrait that changed the balance. It was the decision to confront it. Behind the scenes, William had quietly requested a new protocol be established regarding curatorial decisions involving portraits of royal children. Going forward, any modification or rotation of such imagery, whether at Clarence House, Windsor, Sandringham, or Balmoral, would require sign-off from the child's direct parent. The policy was not announced publicly, but its existence was felt internally. One longtime staffer called it the new invisible rule. Another, more candid, called it the Charlotte Clause. As spring approached, the royal family prepared for an Easter service at St. George's Chapel. The gathering, traditionally photographed in a wide group shot, featured a quiet but poignant arrangement. Front and centre stood King Charles and Queen Camilla. To their right, Prince William and Princess Catherine. In front of them, slightly to the left, framed by light and symmetry, stood Princess Charlotte. No one commented on the formation. No one needed to. The picture was distributed across press agencies and media outlets within hours. It ran in nearly every major Sunday edition, with headlines that ranged from "The Future in Focus" to "Portrait of a Family in Balance." In private, a palace photographer shared that the placement was entirely unplanned. The family had naturally arranged themselves that way. But instinct, in royalty, is never just chance. It's heritage at work. And so, as the image reached homes across the Commonwealth, it told a story far more enduring than any controversy could. It told the story of a father who refused to let his daughter's presence be diminished, of a mother who preserved dignity through silence, of a young girl who, without knowing it, had reminded a nation what strength in youth could look like, and of a future king who proved that power, when used precisely and privately, reshapes not just portraits on a wall, but the very perception of who gets to define history. The monarchy had spoken, not with declarations, but with clarity. And in that clarity, the golden frame around Princess Charlotte's portrait would forever stand, not just as a decoration, but as a declaration of where the royal story is headed next. In the months that followed, the palace moved, as it always does, quietly, methodically, and with a polished front. But beneath the surface, royal strategists were still unpacking the consequences of what had transpired. The so-called gold frame moment was no longer just a family matter, it had become a turning point in the institution's narrative trajectory. Within the inner corridors of Buckingham Palace, a subtle redefinition of influence had taken root, not by decree, not by scandal, but by precedence. William's intervention, once seen as a protective response to a symbolic slight, was now being studied by royal historians, analysts, and even senior aides as a model of calibrated leadership. The balance of power between tradition and adaptation had always been delicate. But this time, the message had landed without public fallout, without headlines that damaged the monarchy's credibility, and most importantly, without eroding internal respect. Among communications staff, A new guideline emerged in internal briefings. Narrative should reflect generational depth, not dominance. The phrase became code for maintaining focus on legacy while subtly showcasing the next chapter, especially the Wales children, without overpowering the reigning monarch's agenda. Charlotte's image, now a fixture at key events and state properties, served as both a literal and figurative reminder of that balance. And while some considered it ceremonial, others saw it as the crown's new compass pointing steadily toward continuity. In a rare off-the-record comment, a senior press officer from Windsor said, "We've entered the stewardship phase of the monarchy. King Charles leads it, but William is shaping how it survives." For Catherine, the evolution was more personal than political. Those close to her described a woman increasingly aware of the power of soft symbolism. She began working more closely with royal archivists, advising on how images of the family would be preserved for future generations, not just in the media, but within the royal collection itself. She was not just protecting her children, she was curating their legacy. Meanwhile, William continued his public duties with renewed momentum. He launched a new environmental initiative focused on community resilience, tying it to his father's ecological legacy, but presenting it with the energy and accessibility that defined his generation. At a youth summit in Manchester, he gave a keynote speech that, while focused on climate, carried a subtle undercurrent about his leadership philosophy. We inherit more than titles, we inherit responsibilities, and it's what we do quietly, out of sight, that tells future generations who we really were. Applause followed. But for those who had watched the Clarence House episode unfold, the subtext was unmistakable. Even Camilla's allies could not ignore the shift. A longtime associate of the Queen consort shared, under condition of anonymity, that the Queen had since embraced a quieter, more ceremonial role by choice. She's seen the tide turn, and to her credit, she hasn't fought it. Her public schedule reflected this new direction. Fewer leadership panels, more literary awards, regional visits, and curated events with legacy charities. She was no longer competing for space, she was anchoring it. King Charles, for his part, maintained his balance. Though aware of every detail from the incident, he never publicly or privately reprimanded either party. But palace insiders shared that in private, he expressed pride in William's handling of the matter. He did what a king-in-waiting should do. Charles was reported to have told a senior aide, and he did it with restraint. That matters. The institution, though steeped in centuries of precedent, has always survived by evolving without appearing to change. And the repositioning of Charlotte's portrait, what some had dismissed as minor, was now cited internally as a masterstroke in that tradition. Royal protocol even began revising educational materials for new staff. A section on visual hierarchies now included a subsection titled Symbolic Placement and Generational Projection. It used the Clarence House Gallery revision as a case study in how image management reflects institutional philosophy. The effect rippled beyond the palace. Polling from public opinion firms showed a measurable uptick in confidence among younger demographics, not just in William and Catherine, but in the concept of monarchy itself. Focus groups noted terms like modern, measured, and family-centered when asked about the Wales household. It was the kind of sentiment no media campaign could fabricate. In one televised panel, a veteran royal commentator summed it up best. The monarchy didn't change direction, it adjusted its posture, just enough to keep the horizon in view. And that horizon, framed in gold, still featured Charlotte. As the year drew to a close, plans for the next Jubilee were underway. Invitations were being drafted, speeches prepared, and yes, galleries refreshed. This time, there was no tension. The portrait of Princess Charlotte, once removed without consent, now hung confidently in the Hall of Succession. Not alone. Beside her were her brothers, her parents, and a black and white image of Diana deliberately restored to the visual legacy of the family. Visitors to Windsor, who walked the long gallery now, paused instinctively before that cluster of frames. They didn't need tour guides to explain the significance. They could feel it. Not the drama, but the design, the family, the future, and the quiet force behind it all, a daughter framed by history, and a father who refused to let